Have you ever judged someone for caring too much, for asking questions, for paying attention where they shouldn't? Well, know that this story will make you completely rethink what it means to be nosy. When Harold Miller opened that abandoned box in the post office depot, his hands trembled. What he saw inside would forever change the lives of an entire family and prove that sometimes being nosy can literally save lives. This is the true story of the mailman everyone judged until they discovered the secret he carried. And what you're about to discover may surprise you in ways you never imagined. Harold was one of those mail carriers who knew everyone by name. He knew who had traveled, who was sick, who had changed jobs. For many residents of Millbrook Ridge, a small town lost in rural Tennessee, this was irritating. He only cares about other people's lives, they grumbled on street corners. Nosy, they said disdainfully. But no one had any idea of the weight Harold carried behind that impeccable uniform and those attentive eyes. No one knew that each question, each gesture of care, was driven by a deep pain and a promise he made more than 20 years ago. Stay with me until the end, because what happened in March 2019 changed not only Harold's life, but that of an entire community. A simple box, an outdated address, and a decision that violated all postal protocols, but which was about to save the life of a 5-year-old child. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times we ignore signs around us? How many times do we let something important pass by because we think it's not our business? That box had a special label, perishable, refrigerate immediately. The sender was a children's hospital, and nobody, absolutely nobody, had come to pick it up. While his colleagues said, "It's not our problem," Harold felt that something was terribly wrong. And when he finally decided to open that package, defying all the rules, what he found inside froze his blood. What was in that box was worth almost $500,000, and time was running out. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times we ignore the signs around us? How many times do we let something important pass by because we think it's none of our business? That box had a special label, perishable, refrigerate immediately. The sender was a children's hospital, and nobody, absolutely nobody, had come to pick it up, while his colleagues said, "It's not our problem." Harold felt that something was terribly wrong, and when he finally decided to open that package, defying all the rules, what he found inside froze his blood. What was in that box was worth almost $500,000, and time was running out. Before I continue this story that will leave you speechless, I need to ask you something. If you feel this story is touching your heart, if it somehow makes sense to you, please like this video. Because stories like this need to be seen. They need to reach more people who also believe in human kindness. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button now, because here we share real stories of ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And I know you won't want to miss the next ones. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged for caring too much about someone? Or have you ever judged someone without knowing the whole story? Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and bring these messages of hope to many more people. Every like, every comment, every share makes a real difference, and I'm sure that after hearing the end of this story, you'll want more people to know about it too. Now come back with me, because what Harold found inside that box was only the beginning of a desperate race against time. Inside the thermal bags, the dry ice had already melted completely. The 4 medicine bottles were there, inert, with a label that nearly stopped Harold's heart. Now, come back with me, because what Harold found inside that box was only the beginning of a desperate race against time. Inside the thermal bags, the dry ice had already melted completely. The 4 medicine bottles were there, inert, with a label that nearly stopped Harold's heart. To understand the weight of that moment, you need to know who Harold Miller was. At 62, he wasn't just another mailman doing his job. Harold was a constant presence on the dusty streets of Millbrook Ridge, that small town in rural Tennessee where everyone knows everyone, but few really care. His grey hair was carefully combed, his blue uniform always impeccable, even under the scorching summer sun, and he had a unique way of greeting each person as if they were the most important person of the day. But there was something about Harold that bothered many people. He paid too much attention. While other mail carriers simply delivered mail and moved on, Harold knew exactly who had traveled in the last few weeks, who had changed jobs, who was sick, who had just had a baby. He knew the name of every resident, every dog, every cat that crossed his path. He knew when the mailbox was overflowing for too long. He noticed when the curtains were closed in the middle of a sunny afternoon. He realized when someone stopped receiving those weekly letters from their family. This attention to detail, this genuine curiosity about people's lives, was seen by many as an unbearable flaw. "Nosy," some residents would say as he passed by. "That man only wants to know about other people's lives," others grumbled from the benches in the central square, shaking their heads in disapproval. Some avoided long conversations with Harold, answering his polite questions with dry monosyllables, making it clear that such proximity was not welcome. For a society that increasingly values privacy and distance, Harold seemed like a character out of his time, someone who insisted on crossing invisible boundaries that should be respected. But here's the hidden truth that no one in Millbrook Ridge knew. Harold had a reason he carried silently, like an invisible weight on his shoulders, every day of that solitary journey through the city streets. Every question he asked, every attentive glance, every seemingly excessive gesture of care, all of it was driven by something much greater than simple curiosity. It was a promise, a personal mission born from the deepest pain a human being can experience. The decisions we make in life rarely happen in a vacuum. They are shaped by experiences, by losses, by transformations that break us and rebuild us in ways that others cannot see just by looking at our surface. Harold had gone through one of those transformations, the kind that forever changes a person's mindset, that redefines what really matters, that makes you see the world through completely different lenses. And on that day in March, when he opened that unclaimed box, all those years of silent preparation were about to find their purpose. The impact of what was about to happen would reverberate far beyond that small town, because sometimes the people we judge most harshly are precisely those who carry the deepest stories. But at that crucial moment, with those medicine bottles in his hands, Harold needed to understand what had gone wrong. It all began on an ordinary morning in March 2019. A medium-sized box arrived at the Millbrook Ridge Post Office Depot addressed to Sarah Mitchell at 1847 Oakwood Lane. At first glance, it seemed like just another routine package among hundreds that passed through daily. But Harold, with that trained eye for detail that most would ignore, noticed something different immediately. The sender caught his attention. St. Jude Children's Hospital, Memphis, Tennessee, and there were two red markings on the side of the box that made his stomach clench. Perishable. And just below, in even larger letters, refrigerate immediately. Children's. Hospitals don't send ordinary packages, and those markings meant the contents had an expiration date, that every hour counted. Harold knew the Mitchells. He knew Sarah and her husband Tom were a young, hard-working couple with a little daughter named Emma, just 5 years old. He had delivered mail to that house dozens of times, but when he tried to deliver the box for the first time, there was no answer. The house was strangely silent, the curtains drawn, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Harold returned the next day. He knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, waited. Nothing. He left a note in the mailbox informing them of the attempted delivery. He returned a third time 2 days later, strictly following postal protocol. The house remained empty, without any sign of life. The lights never came on at night. The car wasn't in the garage. There was no movement whatsoever. It was as if the family had simply vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind an entire life frozen in time. Following official protocol, after 30 days without anyone claiming the package, the box was transferred to the unclaimed items warehouse. There, along with returned letters, forgotten packages, and mail with incorrect addresses, that box from the children's hospital remained. But something wouldn't leave Harold in peace. It was a feeling that went beyond intuition, a deep unease that kept him awake at night, turning over possibilities in his mind. Why would a family simply abandon their home without updating their address? Why wouldn't anyone come to pick up something sent by a children's hospital with an urgent marking? Behind the scenes of that silent warehouse, while his co-workers went about their mechanical routines without question, Harold couldn't stop thinking about that box. He returned to the Mitchells' address a few more times, even without anything to deliver, just to check. He discreetly asked the neighbors, but no one knew anything. Some said they saw the family leave in a hurry a few weeks ago. Others hadn't even noticed their absence. In a small town where everyone supposedly knows each other, it's surprising how invisible people can become when they really need attention. The hidden truth behind this situation was about to be revealed, but before that, Harold needed to make a decision that would completely change the journey of everyone involved. The mentality of simply blindly following rules and protocols was about to be challenged by raw humanity and the urgency of a situation he didn't yet fully understand. Each passing day increased the pressure on his shoulders. That perishable dial echoed in his mind like a silent alarm that only he could hear. On the 6th day after the box arrived at the depot, Harold made the most important decision of his career, a decision that directly violated postal regulations that could cost him his job, his reputation, perhaps even bring legal consequences. But sometimes the impact of doing the right thing outweighs the fear of the consequences. Sometimes the most significant transformations are born from acts of compassionate disobedience. And if you feel that this story is stirring something within you, that it's making you rethink what it truly means to care about others, subscribe to this channel because you are part of this community that believes humanity is still worthwhile. With his hands trembling slightly, Harold picked up the box from the storage room, checked that he was alone and carefully began to open it. The sound of cardboard tearing echoed in the silence of that empty warehouse. It was late afternoon. Most of the employees had already left, and Harold knew he was crossing a line of no return. His colleagues had made their opinions clear during breakfast that week. "It's not our problem, Harold," one of them said, almost irritated. "The person didn't come to pick it up. We followed protocol. End of story." Another added, "You worry too much, man. You're going to get yourself into trouble." But while they could simply forget and move on, Harold spent his nights awake, tossing and turning in bed, thinking about that family he knew, about that little 5-year-old girl named Emma he saw playing in the yard every time he passed Oakwood Lane. But now he hadn't seen Emma for weeks. He hadn't seen Sarah. He hadn't seen Tom. The house was abandoned, and no one seemed to care except him. That gnawing unease inside was more than simple. Professional curiosity. It was a visceral need to understand, to act, to prevent something terrible from happening if he could stop it. And there he was, directly violating United States Postal Service regulations, opening mail that didn't belong to him, risking everything. When he finally managed to open the box completely, what he saw nearly stopped his heart. Inside were thermal bags of the kind used to transport sensitive medical materials. The dry ice that was supposed to keep everything refrigerated had completely melted, leaving only a cold, useless dampness at the bottom of the packaging. And there, carefully secured in protective foam holders, were 4 small vials, about the size of a thumb, containing clear liquid and detailed medical labels. Harold picked up one of the vials with reverent care, as if he were holding something sacred, and began to read. The words on the label danced before his eyes as the revelation of what he held in his hands began to take shape. Personalized CAR-T therapy, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Patient, Emma Mitchell. Use immediately after receipt. Keep refrigerated between 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. And then, at the bottom, in smaller letters that seemed to scream at Harold, was the declared value for insurance purposes, $475,000. Almost $500,000 worth of cutting-edge medical treatment there in that forgotten warehouse, its expiration date already past due to the heat. The transformation that occurred within Harold at that moment was instantaneous and total. Everything connected at once. Emma was battling leukemia. This was a revolutionary immunotherapy treatment, likely obtained after months of legal battles with insurance companies, waiting lists, and desperate hope. And for some reason he still didn't understand. The family hadn't been able to receive the only thing that could save that child's life. The impact of this realization was like a punch to the gut. Every second. That box sat there represented Emma's life, slipping through their fingers. Harold knew more about childhood leukemia than he would have liked. He knew about the urgency, about how every day counts, about how treatments lose effectiveness when not administered at the right time. He knew about the brutal journey those families face, about the impossible decisions, about the war mentality you need to adopt to fight a disease that gives no respite. And now, holding those vials in his hands, he understood that he was facing a tragedy that could still be avoided, or a catastrophe already accomplished. But Harold wasn't the type to give up easily. The hidden truths he carried from his own past had prepared him precisely for this moment, though he didn't know it yet. Harold carefully put the vials back in the box, grabbed his coat and car keys. He had old records of the Mitchells. Perhaps there was an alternate address, a phone number, something that would lead him to this family. Harold's heart raced as he rushed back to the warehouse's administrative office. Emma Mitchell was battling cancer. That microscopic drug, that revolutionary therapy costing nearly $500,000, was probably her only real chance of survival. But the question hammering in his mind was devastating. Why hadn't the parents come to pick it up? Why would a family simply disappear when their daughter's life literally depended on picking up a package? None of this made sense unless something very, very wrong had happened. Harold knew he was about to cross another red line. He had violated yet another protocol by accessing old customer registration files, those records that were supposed to be confidential and used only for official purposes. His fingers trembled as he typed Sarah Mitchell's name into the obsolete postal system. And there, among information from years ago, he found what he was looking for: a secondary address listed as a temporary residence from 3 years ago. It was a trailer park called Riverside Mobile Homes on the outskirts of Millbrook Ridge, about 40 minutes away. There was no guarantee they were there, but it was the only clue he had. Without a second thought, Harold grabbed the box of medication, carefully placed it in the back seat of his car, and drove off as the sun began to set on the horizon. Every minute counted now. The drive to the trailer park was one of the longest of his life, even though it lasted less than an hour. His mind raced, constructing scenarios, preparing for what he might find. Had the family lost their house? Were they experiencing financial difficulties and had to move in a hurry? But even so, how could they not have updated the address for something as crucial as his daughter's treatment? When he finally arrived at Riverside Mobile Homes, the hidden truth began to reveal itself in a way Harold could never have imagined. The place was humble, with trailers lined up on small lots, some well-maintained, others visibly worn by time. Harold stopped in front of the number on the old registration and took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The transformation of that middle-class neighborhood into that trailer park spoke volumes about the financial impact a child's illness can have on a family, even in the United States, with its comprehensive healthcare system. He banged on the trailer door 3 times, his heart pounding so hard he could hear the blood pulsing in his ears. Hurried footsteps came from inside, and then the door swung open. Sarah Mitchell appeared, but she wasn't the same woman Harold remembered seeing smiling in the Oakwood Lane yard. She was unrecognizable. Disheveled hair, sunken eyes red from crying, an expression of exhaustion so profound she seemed to have aged 10 years in a few weeks. She wore rumpled clothes and had coffee stains on her blouse, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days and didn't care about her appearance. When Sarah saw the postal worker's uniform, her eyes widened in instant panic. Before Harold could even speak, she put her hands to her face and whispered in a broken voice he would never forget, "The medicine! Oh my God, Emma's medicine!" And then, as if all the strength that held her upright had been taken away at once, Sarah began to collapse. Harold held her by the shoulders and said, "I brought the box, but we need to talk. I need to understand what happened." And what she told him in the following minutes broke Harold's heart into pieces. The revelation that was about to happen would show that behind every superficial judgment, every criticism of people who don't take care of their own responsibilities, there are stories of suffering and circumstances that no one should have to face alone. If you've been following this journey so far, if you feel that real stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to this channel, because you are part of this community that chooses empathy instead of judgment. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and began to explain the nightmare her family was living through. Her voice trembled, breaking after a few words, but she needed to tell her story. 3 weeks earlier, Tom, her husband, had been in a devastating car accident on the interstate while driving home from work. A truck lost control in the rain and collided head-on with his car. Tom was rushed to the regional hospital in critical condition and fell into a coma. Doctors didn't know if he would wake up, and even if he did, they didn't know the extent of the neurological damage. Sarah remembered every detail of that horrible day: the police call, the desperate race to the hospital, seeing the love of her life hooked up to machines, unrecognizable with so many injuries. But the nightmare didn't end there. Emma, their 5-year-old daughter, was in the middle of an aggressive chemotherapy protocol for acute lymphoblastic leukemia at the Memphis Cancer Center, 90 kilometers away. Sarah explained through sobs that her life had become an impossible journey between 2 hospitals, 2 lives hanging by a thread, 2 loves she couldn't lose. She spent her mornings with Tom, checking for any improvement, talking to him, even without response, holding that inert hand waiting for a squeeze that never came. Then she rushed to Memphis, where Emma faced brutal chemotherapy sessions that left her small, fragile body exhausted, nauseous, suffering in ways no child should ever know. Their lives had been brutally and instantly transformed. Sarah lost her job as an administrative assistant because she could no longer keep up the attendance. How could she, when she was torn between 2 hospitals and a sick daughter? The house on Oakwood Lane, the one Harold knew, went into foreclosure after medical bills began consuming every penny they had, even with insurance. The American healthcare system is cruel in that way, covering treatments but leaving families drowning in co-payments, deductibles, and uncovered expenses. They hastily moved into that trailer borrowed from a distant cousin, throwing belongings into disorganized boxes, focused only on surviving another day. And in the midst of all this overwhelming chaos, in the middle of this storm that was destroying everything around them, Sarah made a fatal mistake. She completely forgot to update the address at the post office. It seemed so small, so insignificant compared to keeping 2 people alive. But now, she understood the devastating impact of that oversight. "The medication," she repeated, her voice now a whisper of pure panic. That was Emma's last hope. We spent 8 months fighting with the insurance company. 8 months of calls, appeals, lawyers, pleas. They said it was experimental, that it wasn't proven, that they wouldn't cover it. But the doctors insisted it was her best chance. Tears streamed uncontrollably down Sarah's face as she explained that finally, after an exhausting legal battle, the insurance company had relented and approved coverage for CAR-T therapy. It was a miracle, an impossible victory. The hospital had prepared the personalized treatment specifically for Emma's type of leukemia, using her own genetically modified T cells. It had taken months of preparation, analyses, and procedures, and then they sent it to the address they had on file. The only address Sarah didn't even remember was outdated. She had assumed the hospital would call, that they would let her know that there would be some kind of confirmation before it was sent. Harold felt the full weight of the situation fall on his shoulders. There was the hidden truth behind the unclaimed box. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't disinterest. It wasn't irresponsibility. It was a family being crushed by the impossible weight of 2 simultaneous tragedies, trying to survive in a system that punishes the vulnerable. And now, with the vials already expired due to the heat, Emma's last hope might have been destroyed by a communication failure. Harold looked at the box in his hands and made the most important decision of his life. He carefully placed the box on the small table in the trailer and held Sarah's trembling hands. "Listen," he said with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I'm going to solve this. I don't know how yet, but we'll find a solution." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of despair and disbelief, like someone who had been disappointed so many times that she could no longer believe in miracles. But Harold had a determination that came from a deep place, a place forged by pain and the promise he had made long ago. He wasn't going to let another child die if there was anything, absolutely anything, he could do. Harold asked to use Sarah's phone and began making calls right there in that modest trailer, a call that would last for the next 2 hours. First, he called St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis directly, navigating through endless automated menus, until he finally got through to a human being in the oncology pharmacy department. He explained the situation in detail, his voice alternating between urgency and pleading. The initial operator said they couldn't help, that he would need to speak to another department. Harold was transferred, and transferred again, and yet again. But Harold didn't give up. With each new person he spoke to, he told the whole story. The accident, the coma, the forced move, the outdated address, the expired. Bottles, the 5-year-old girl whose last hope was literally melting away. He cited postal protocols, mentioned the refrigeration markings that had been ignored, appealed to the humanity of each person on the other end of the line. Some were kind, but said they couldn't help. Others were cold and bureaucratic. But Harold continued, his voice hoarse from talking so much, but never losing that ironclad determination. Finally, after being transferred to what seemed to be the 20th person, Harold managed to speak with the supervisor of the specialized therapies department, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen. He told the story once more, but this time with even more emotion, letting his own vulnerability show. He spoke about Emma, about Sarah, about the injustice of it all. And then, in a moment of complete revelation, Harold spoke about his own daughter, Rebecca, about how he lost her to leukemia 25 years ago, about how that pain never truly healed. "I can't save my daughter," he said, his voice breaking, "but maybe I can help save Emma." On the other end of the line there was a long silence. Then Dr. Chen asked some technical details about Emma's case, checked records in the system, consulted with colleagues. Harold could hear muffled conversations, the sound of keyboards, pages being turned. Each second of that wait seemed like an eternity. Sarah sat beside him, her hands clasped in silent prayer, tears streaming continuously down her face. The transformation that would happen in the next few minutes depended entirely on that call, that human connection through telephone lines between a stubborn postman and a doctor who still believed in doing the right thing. Finally, Dr. Chen came back on the line. "Mr. Miller," she said, and Harold held his breath. "I managed to get approval from the administration. We're going to prepare a new emergency shipment of CAR-T therapy for Emma Mitchell, at no additional cost to the family, considering the extraordinary circumstances of the case. But there's one non-negotiable condition. Someone needs to pick it up in person here in Memphis. We can't risk another shipment by mail. And it needs to be tomorrow, because the preparation deadline is already approaching." The impact of those words was like an electric shock running through Harold's body. It was a miracle, an improbable miracle born of pure stubbornness and human compassion. But there was a problem. Sarah couldn't leave either Tom or Emma alone, and she didn't have money for the bus fare, much less a working car. Harold looked at her, saw the hope and despair battling on her face, and without a second thought said on the phone, "I'll take her. I'll pick up the medication myself tomorrow. If you're following this journey and feeling that decisions like this define who we truly are, subscribe to this channel, because you are part of this story of humanity." And then Harold realized he needed to tell Sarah something he had kept to himself for 25 years. The next morning, well before sunrise, Harold picked Sarah up from the trailer. She was waiting at the door, a small bag in her hands, with the look of someone who hadn't slept all night. They got into Harold's car in silence, and for the first 20 minutes of the drive in the darkness of the early morning, neither of them said a word. Only the sound of the engine and the asphalt under the tires filled the space between them. Sarah looked out the window, lost in thoughts that Harold could only imagine. He knew she was thinking of Emma, that frail little body fighting a brutal illness, and of Tom, motionless in that hospital bed. But as the road stretched out before them, and the sky began to lighten with the first rays of light, Harold felt it was time to reveal the hidden truth that shaped his every action, every seemingly exaggerated decision, every moment of attention that the people of Millbrook Ridge judged as intrusion. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice breaking after the first few words. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about me. Something that explains why I'm doing this, why I care so much." Sarah turned to him. Curiosity and gratitude mingled in her tired gaze. Harold continued, the words coming out with difficulty after so many years of being held back. 25 years ago, I was a different man. I had a family, a wonderful wife named Margaret, and a daughter, my only daughter, Rebecca. His voice trembled as he pronounced that name, which still hurt after so much time. She was 7 when she started getting too tired to play. Bruises appeared without explanation. Constant fevers. We took her to the doctor, and the diagnosis came like a bolt of lightning. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the same type Emma has. Sarah held her breath, her hand instinctively going to her mouth. Harold blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that were already beginning to form. Back then, treatments weren't like they are today. There was no CAR-T therapy, no revolutionary immunotherapies. We had brutal chemotherapy that destroyed her little body, bone marrow transplants that never worked properly. We watched our little girl wither away for 18 months. 18 months of hope and despair, of temporary improvements followed by devastating relapses. The transformation Harold had undergone in those months was etched in every word, in every painful pause. The harrowing journey of those dark days returned in full force. Harold recounted the sleepless nights by Rebecca's hospital bedside, Margaret holding her tiny hand as she vomited from side effects, the moments when Rebecca asked in that weak voice why she was sick, why she couldn't play like the other children. In the end, Harold continued, tears now streaming freely down his face, there was nothing more we could do. Rebecca died in my arms one autumn afternoon. She weighed less than 20 pounds. She had lost all her hair, but she was still trying to smile at us. She still said she loved us. The impact of that revelation filled the car like a physical presence. Sarah was crying now too, reaching out to touch Harold's arm in a gesture of silent comfort. Margaret never recovered, Harold said softly. The pain was too great. We divorced 2 years later. She moved to the other side of the country, trying to escape the memories. I stayed in Millbrook Ridge, working at the post office, living an empty life. He paused for a long time before continuing. But I made a promise. Standing before my daughter's grave, I promised that if I could ever, somehow, prevent another family from going through the hell I went through, I would, no matter what. Harold's mindset had been completely reshaped by that tragedy. Every family he saw, every child, every suspicious package, it was all filtered through the lens of that sacred promise. That's why I pay attention, he explained, his voice regaining strength. That's why I care about things others find insignificant. That's why I can't just follow protocols and forget. Because I know that behind every box, every address, every name, there's a real life, a real family, maybe a child who can still be saved. Sarah looked at Harold with a new and profound understanding and whispered the words he needed to hear. "You're not intrusive, Harold. You're an angel." Tears streamed down her face as she held his hand tightly. "Rebecca would be so proud of the man you've become. You've transformed your pain into love for people you don't even know. That's not intrusiveness. That's what the world should be." Harold couldn't respond, only nodded as he drove, letting the tears fall freely for the first time in years. The rest of the drive to Memphis was filled with a sacred silence, the kind of silence that exists between people who have shared their deepest truths. They arrived at St. Jude Children's Hospital shortly before 9 in the morning. Dr. Patricia Chen greeted them personally, handing them a professional cooler containing the new CAR-T therapy vials, carefully packaged. "Take it straight to the oncology center," she instructed. "We have everything coordinated. Emma can start treatment today." The drive back was quick, Harold driving with renewed purpose, Sarah hugging that cooler as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. And it was. Emma Mitchell received the treatment that same afternoon, the modified T. Cells were infused into her veins while Sarah held her tiny hand, and Harold waited outside, praying silently. The first few days were difficult, with fever and intense side effects, but the following weeks brought signs of hope. The cancer cell counts began to fall. The doctors were optimistic, and 6 months later came the news that would change everything. Emma was in complete remission. There were no more signs of leukemia in her body. The treatment had worked. Those vials that had almost been lost forever had saved her life. But the miracles didn't stop there. 2 weeks after Emma received treatment, Tom woke up from his coma. It was a gradual awakening, confused at first, but he was alive and conscious. He began a long process of physical and cognitive rehabilitation, relearning to walk, to speak clearly, to rebuild his life step by step. The journey would be long, but the Mitchell family was reunited, and that was all that mattered. When Harold's story spread through Millbrook Ridge, the transformation was extraordinary. That same mailman whom everyone judged as nosy was suddenly seen in a completely different light. People began to understand that behind those questions, that attention to detail, was a broken heart that had found purpose in caring for others. The community, both ashamed and inspired, organized a fundraising campaign to help the Mitchell family with the devastating medical expenses. In 3 weeks, $47,000 were donated. Neighbors, who had never spoken to the Mitchells, showed up with food, with clothes for Emma, with offers of genuine help. Harold was nominated and selected as Postal Service Employee of the Year, a rarely bestowed national honor. A ceremony was planned, with press and official speeches. But Harold, true to his humble nature, publicly refused the award. "I only did what any father would do," he simply stated in a respectful letter to the administration. "I don't need recognition. Seeing Emma smile again is all the prize I need." The impact of this refusal was even greater than accepting the award would have been, showing that his actions were never about glory or validation, but about honoring a promise made so long ago. Today, 5 years after that crucial day in March, Emma Mitchell is 10 years old, completely healthy, playing, studying, living the childhood that was almost stolen from her. She calls Harold doting grandpa, and he visits the family every week, always bringing some silly little gift or simply staying for dinner. Tom has recovered beyond all expectations and returned to work part-time. Sarah got a new job, and the family moved back into their own home, modest but full of love. If you're following this story to the end and feel that stories of redemption like this need to be told, subscribe to this channel, because every subscriber helps spread messages of hope. And now, let me tell you what this story really means for all of us. Harold Miller's story isn't just about a mailman who saved a life. It's about something much bigger, much deeper, that needs to be understood in the world we live in today. We live in a time where people are encouraged to mind their own business, to not interfere, to keep their distance. We build invisible walls around ourselves and call it respecting boundaries. And while boundaries are important, there's a huge difference between respecting someone's privacy and simply not caring about others. Harold teaches us that kindness is never intrusion. Kindness is humanity in its purest form. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone clearly needing help but did nothing because it wasn't your business? How many times have you ignored signs that something was wrong with a neighbor, a colleague, an acquaintance, simply because interfering seemed uncomfortable or inappropriate? The transformation we need as a society begins when we understand that paying attention to others is not about being gossipy or intrusive. It's about being present. It's about choosing to see people as complete human beings with complex stories, invisible struggles, and real needs that go beyond what they appear to be on the surface. Harold spent 25 years being judged by the very quality that eventually saved a life. 25 years of hearing that he was intrusive, that he worried too much, that he should simply do his job and leave. But he never changed who he was, because he knew something we all should know. Our attentiveness, our care, our willingness to act when something seems wrong can literally be the difference between life and death for someone. I'm not talking about being intrusive or disrespectful. I'm talking about cultivating a mindset of active compassion, of being willing to go beyond protocol when humanity demands it. The hidden truth this story reveals is that many of the people we judge most harshly are precisely those who carry the deepest stories. That person who seems overly worried may have lost someone due to inattention. That neighbor who always asks too many questions may have experienced devastating loneliness. That colleague who insists on helping may have been saved by the kindness of strangers in the past. We all carry invisible wounds that shape who we are, and sometimes the people we criticize the most are the ones we need most in the world. Harold's choice had a profound impact, extending far beyond saving Emma. It transformed an entire community, making people rethink what it means to be a neighbor, a citizen, a human being. The decisions we make in crucial moments define not only our own character, but create ripples that reach people we will never know. When Harold decided to open that box, when he decided not to give up, when he decided to drive 3 hours to get the medicine, he was honoring Rebecca's memory, but he was also showing Emma, Sarah, all of Millbrook Ridge that there are still people who choose the difficult path because it is the right path. This journey of transformation doesn't end with Harold. It continues with each of us, because after hearing this story, you have a choice. You can move on and forget, returning to the routine of indifference that modern society normalizes. Or you can let this story change something within you. You can start paying more attention to the people around you. You can choose to be that person who asks, "Is everything all right?" when you notice something different. You can decide that protocols and social conventions will never be more important than making a difference in someone's life. But before you go, there's something important I need to ask you. If you've made it this far, to these final words, it's because this story has touched something real inside you. And I want you to know that this is no coincidence. You stopped everything you were doing, ignored the distractions, and stayed here with me for all these minutes, because deep down, you also believe that the world can be better when we choose to care. And that says a lot about who you are, so do this. If this story really resonated with you, leave a like on this video. It's not just a little button, it's you telling me, "I understood the message, I feel the same way." And even more importantly, subscribe to the channel now, because here we share real stories like this, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories that the mainstream media doesn't tell, but that need to be heard. You deserve this kind of content in your life. And leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you really made it this far. I love reading every comment, every story you share. That's how this community grows. That's how we continue spreading hope in a world that sometimes seems to have forgotten it. There's a video over here that tells another incredible story of someone who made a difference when nobody believed in them. Click and stay with me there, because I'm sure you'll like it too. And remember, you can be Harold in someone's life today. A small gesture, a sincere act of kindness can change everything. Go out there and make a difference. Until the next video.